he saw a lot about Russia and Ukraine that day. And this was February 22nd of 2014. So Maidan had just happened, where they overthrew and Lindsey Graham and Victoria Nuland were handing out cookies to the Ukrainians. But that was at the beginning of this, under Bush, Putin had taken Crimea, I think it was, and there was Crimea, there was Georgia. But when we got to that moment in time, this war, we didn't know this was going to happen, especially being such a drawn-out war in which every day President Trump is getting up and saying there are thousands of people dying every day, both Russians and Ukrainians. And, we got to stop this war. And Putin, who he thought he'd be able to negotiate with, has been very crafty, which Dad had prophesied that as well. And so let's have a look at this other clip. And this is where my dad sees God's fist smacking down on Russia. So again, we're at February 22nd, 2014, and Dad is prophesying about Russia and Ukraine. So we're going to have a look at that, and we'll come back.
And my fist is about to smack down on Russia. For out of the rebellion of the Ukraine, which was seen by my prophet, shall come out of those ashes beauty. Shall come out of that sadness joy. Shall come out of those garments praise, says the Lord. I have searched for a man and a woman who would stand in the Oval Office and pray and call for the restoration of the fortunes of Zion. I have looked for a man who would pray for the restoration of the fortunes of Zion.
So restoration, I'm writing it down. Restoration is a very important word because that is what's happening right now. The Trump administration restoring the fortunes of Zion. And that's not just money. That is a standard in this Christian nation. That is a free nation. So you're not forced. Like if you go to any Muslim country, you're going to deal with being forced into Islam or facing repercussions for that, either being enslaved or killed or imprisoned or treated as less than. And that's to all these people who are about social justice. They always turned a blind eye to the things that they're doing over there in these Middle Eastern countries in which they would not themselves actually survive. Think of Gays for Palestine, for instance. They don't actually have a good understanding of Islam because it's been presented to them in a deceptive way as the religion of peace and accepting of all races. And that's why they always want to shout racism as an excuse anytime you question them. If you question them, oh, you're racist. Well, you're Islamophobic, when that actually isn't the case. But what I find interesting about things, is that this year we saw what happened in Iran. With Operation Rising Lion, President Trump intervening with the United States of America, their military, and taking out those nuclear sites so that Iran could not, because they were very close to getting a nuclear weapon, and they're nuts over there. And the thing about it is that the reason Iran was able to be taken over was because the progressive liberals joined hands with the Muslims in Iran, and they were going to overthrow the Shah and no longer have a monarchy, which is what their desire was, but they were tricked. And many of those liberals were killed shortly after the Iranian Revolution when the Ayatollah took over Iran. And so you see this coupling of communism with Islam today. And this is the thing that Dad was seeing. He saw it many times in prophecy. Russia will join its hands with Iran and Syria and gather as many people as possible to come against Israel and the United States of America. Dad prophesied that on a different date. And so today, in this particular prophecy on February 22nd, 2014, you're seeing him refer to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. But you have this issue where Ukraine is wanting to join NATO, is being supported by the West. And you have Putin over here who has joined hands not only with China, another communist country, but also Iran. And there's the buying and selling of oil and all the whatever's going on with them. There's a lot of detail. But Dad, standing in 2014, God shows him Russia and shows him Ukraine. Now, the good thing about it is that we know that out of the ashes will come beauty, and out of the sadness will come joy. We just heard him prophesy that. But that means there have to be ashes and sadness. And so we have seen, and it's very limited because of conspiracy theories and, Ukraine's done this and this and this wrong. Well, Russia's done this and this and this wrong. At the end of the day, you are seeing this war being dragged out. And they are running out of young people. They are running out of a generation of people in both countries as a result of this war. And, people want to say, well, Putin is helping Trump stop the globalists, but that is not what's going on. And I know this because of what my dad prophesied. He prophesied particularly about Putin, that eventually he will turn around and go back to where he came from. That God said he's going to put a hook in his nostril, turn around and send him back to where he came from. That he would die by the sword in his own land. And that it would take a servant's broom to sweep up the many webs that he's woven. Now, these are multiple prophecies my dad's given about Putin. I'm just culminating them into because I've been following this for so long. But you see how he refers to God has searched for a man and a woman who would stand in the Oval Office and pray. And today, we have that. That part is fulfilled. And so we know that ultimately this Russia situation is going to be taken care of. But I think that many have been deceived by Putin, including Trump, who felt like he would be able to easily handle this war and he had such a good relationship with Putin. And again, when Trump is saying he has a good relationship and they're, he's speaking nicely of them publicly because he's making deals with these people. If he wants to make a deal with Putin to end the war or whatever else he wants, he can't be bad-mouthing him publicly. And that's very important to Donald Trump. So, people are like, oh, well, he's friends. No, he's not friends. He's not hanging out with these people. They're not going to dinners. He's being smart. He's being wise in how he's dealing with these dictators who have big egos. Oh, we have such a good relationship, everything's because he knows that he has to be careful what he says. Otherwise, Putin, who is a lunatic, Dad referred to him as a junkyard dog when he prophesied about him. He said he would be released and he would bite viciously. And so we're seeing him being very deceptive. His goal is the return of the Soviet Union and retaking of those territories and more if he can. Dad saw the Baltics, he saw Estonia, he saw Poland, he saw these neighboring countries having to fight. Just recently, we're seeing headlines of Great Britain and France, who normally don't work together, warning their citizens that they must prepare for war with Russia. So although we have not seen the complete fulfillment of this, we are in the middle of this part of the prophecy. And so God there in the prophecy is my fist is about to smack down on Russia. And I believe that's because, Putin may be trying to help Trump with the globalists of the West. But those globalists aren't the only ones. And that's truly what I believe. I think that there's more than one group who want to get control of the globe. So there's that sort of shadow war going on with the elites that we're only seeing what we're allowed to see. But I think that is a part of what's going on here. And so, Putin may help Trump, but to his own end, because he would like to control the globe. And so you see these, Dad referred to them as these little men, and how God was going to topple the short men. We actually recently did a broadcast on that and on that prophecy. So the tensions are rising in Ukraine, and we're watching very closely, and we have been, and we thought it would be taken care of already. But I was not surprised because of what Dad prophesied about Russia.
Yes, so these things should continue to break in the United States. That's what I would expect to occur, Donna, is that you're in the part of the prophecies where you're heading out of this. You're heading out of this. And so the portions of it that remain are kind of explosive parts in my interpretation of many of these. So you mentioned there Russia and Ukraine and these wars that happen. The next part says, he said, while these cats and dogs fight, America will begin to bloom and America will begin to prosper. So if I take us there for just a second, so let me give you my impression of what I have felt like these might mean. And I've been wrong on these a number of times, but let me kind of a crash course through it since we're coming into this year of 2026 that goes to 2027. So it sounded to me like he was stating that while these cats and dogs fight, that whatever's going on here, it's about to bubble up and explode. And also whoever the bad guys were here in the United States who were doing the stuff with elections, and being careful with my words and all of that, that you're about to hit heads with that. That's what I gathered the other day from, Trump did a press conference. He was talking about Tina Peters, and off the cuff, he's stating, you've got more of this coming out, which of course, most of us already knew. You can see that direction. I think on the other side of the coin, they're starting to get a little bit nervous about that, which is kind of weird to watch them at that moment, because you've got all of this evil that's been done by many of these elected officials, and there's these glimmers in their eyes. Oh my gosh, I might actually be in trouble for this. I think a lot of the ground that they believe they stood on was removed a long time ago. And just if I were to best guess it, that this has been in the works for a long time. In fact, probably in the works, Donna, back at the very time you and I even started talking. But let me keep going with that. So whether Russia is a good guy, a bad guy, or whatever, because I know exactly what you're talking about on that. So people will say, well, they're clearing out the deep state. Well, they probably are. So Russia's interest is going to be whatever Putin believes is best for Russia, which may or may not be correct. But it sounds like he's going to be mad and he's going to go do some other things. If I were to interpret this from what I'm hearing, like he's going to say this isn't enough and he's going to go forward, because God was saying, well, these cats and dogs fight. So they have cats and dogs. It's got quite a few of them. America will begin to bloom and America will begin to prosper. So if we go back over to that front, what it sounded like, because your dad was talking about I remember years back, there would be a wall that wouldn't be completed for a takeover. Yeah, and now that's a stunning one. That's one that I didn't want to play because I'm like, well, surely that can't happen because there's two terms and it must mean something else. But that actually gives you an example of how concise that the prophecies are. They actually would not be true had it not worked out the way that it did precisely, with there being a pause, if you will, between the two terms. The Lord did that. There's no hand of man that could have done that. But what most people speculate is that behind the scenes, there's a whole set of military actions that are happening, which I tend to believe, and that the Lord is with the hands of those people as well. And that you're about to see exposures that many people have been waiting for, because the hardworking people in this nation, they're taxed to the hilt. They don't, I know, because I'm one of them. You're one of them. You're barely clawing your way ahead. And the people you're really fighting against, a lot of these liberals, and it's becoming visible now, are people that really aren't paying for anything. One of them is an old roommate of mine from 30 years ago or 25 years ago. I'll look at him and I'll remember it. He would know all the right forms to fill out. He didn't work at then, and I worked doubles. I remember that. I worked at a Subway and I worked at a car lot at one point at the same time, but I worked doubles. I was never not working, and this guy was never, and he was just always complaining. And it's the same thing today. And he's the one really voting against you. He's the one voting that all the burden on your back get heavier. He's the one that they're importing illegals to help that vote so they can steal from you. And those systems and those shackles, which were never what the founders intended, are about to be broken. So with respect,
yes.
Go ahead.
We've seen, I was just going to say, we've seen that really exposed in what's happened in Minneapolis, where Ilhan Omar and Tim Walz are with the Somalians. Mm-hmm. And the using COVID-19 to steal, essentially launder tax money not only for themselves, but to Somalia in enormous amounts of money, $6-8 billion. I don't even know what the number is now. And so we are seeing those things being exposed as well.
Mhm.